We're leaving that because Brendan O'Connor has just started a media conference at Parliament House in Canberra. This is on the unemployment figures.
The samples have changed and been rotated. That may explain why, for example, there seems to be a particular increase in full-time jobs. But the fact is, the unemployment rate is stubbornly high. The last parliamentary term, indeed the first term of the Abbott-Turnbull government, saw an average unemployment rate of 6%. Now that compares with 5.1% under the Labor governments previously, and of course those governments were dealing with a global financial crisis. So we have a stubbornly high unemployment rate. We see unemployment rise. We see the participation rate fall below 65%, which is not good enough. And of course we have a government just barely getting over the line after the election that's been focusing on a cliche, on a slogan, jobs and growth. But underneath that slogan, there's literally nothing. There are no plans, there's no industry policy, there's no plans to find work for more than 700,000 Australians looking for work, and the over 1 million Australians that are looking for more work but cannot find it. So we have real problems in our economy. We're having too few job opportunities for unemployed Australians. We have the highest underemployed number of Australians in our history. We have the lowest wage growth in a generation. We have youth unemployment, if these figures are correct, going up, exceeding 13%, which is quite frankly outrageous, and something has to be done, and it won't be fixed by the so-called intern pathway to nowhere plan of the governments. So more has to be done, engaging with business, instilling confidence with employers and consumers in order to get this economy going. We need to do better than the mantra from Malcolm Turnbull and Scott Morrison saying jobs and growth. Saying that over and over and again does not get anyone any jobs, and more has to be done by this government, and they need to start today. And these figures today showing an increase in the unemployment rate reminds Malcolm Turnbull that he has to get onto this immediately because he is failing in terms of delivering jobs to unemployed Australians. Happy to take questions.
Down the growth in full-time employment down to a possible mistake? Happy
to look at that. I have to say it is interesting. We had 60,000 full-time jobs lost over the last 6 or so months. 60,000 full-time jobs. I'm supposed to believe that there's been 35,000 full-time jobs picked up during an election campaign. I have to say that beggars belief. I tend to believe the figures of the ABS and I take them. I think it's an important institution. I rely upon them. I have to say, I'm not the only one. I think independent commentators are saying the projected increase or the forecast increase in full-time jobs in June does defy, I think, some common sense, because it's very unlikely during a period of an election you would see such a significant employment growth. But even if they were to be true, what we see is the unemployment rate going up. We see that there's been an average unemployment rate for this government of 6%. And you compare that, it's almost 1% higher than the former Labor government, who had to deal with the biggest economic shock to this country and to the world for 70 years. And I think, therefore, much more has to be done. And if you look at the campaigning by the Prime Minister in particular and the Treasurer, there was nothing underneath their slogan, jobs and growth. Absolutely nothing. What policies do they have in place to engage with industry, engage with regions, ensuring and instilling confidence in our economy to see employers employ people? We've seen none of that. So I think we should be cautious about those figures. I'm happy to see what happens in a month's time when we see the next projection, the next calculation, if you like, by the ABS. But I think we should be cautious. It is at a time when they change the samples. And of course, as I say, even if those figures were correct, the unemployment rate has gone up and the participation rate's below 65%, and that's not a good thing.
You're suggesting that the government needs to do more to work with business. I suppose one issue that business would come up with is this issue of penalty rates and potentially the Sunday penalty rates. Where do you stand on that still?
Well, we do not believe there's a correlation between cutting real income of low-paid workers and employment growth. In fact, taking money out of the economy, and that's what would happen if you take money from people's wages and put it into shareholders' pockets, many of whom do not live in Australia, does not improve the economic prospects of this nation. It is completely a fallacious argument to suggest that by cutting lower middle income earners, by cutting penalty rates, you're going to see better employment growth. In fact, the opposite is true. Less money will be spent on goods and services. We know with low and middle income earners, they spend their entire income in the economy. You can't say that about big business. You can't say that about shareholders, many of whom are foreign shareholders. But we do know that if you take money off lower middle income earners and households, there'll be less money in the economy. And on top of that, and in fact, that's why we call upon the government to join Labor and make a submission, or join our submission if they wish, to impress upon the Fair Work Commission not to cut penalty rates in the matter that's before the Commission.
But then how do you try and encourage that youth unemployment rate to improve? Wouldn't a cut in the Sunday penalty rate potentially encourage business to hire younger workers?
Well, firstly, if you think penalty rates are applying to young people in particular, that's not the case. In fact, many people rely on penalty rates. 4 million workers in the labour market during the course of a year will rely upon penalty rates, most of whom are not young people. The idea that this idea that employer bodies sometimes put forward, that the best way the people that are responsible for the failure in our employment initiatives are people employed. The best way to actually do anything about the unemployed is to attack employed workers is a nonsense. It's also unfair. Look, we have a situation where inequality in Australia is at a 75-year high. The last thing you would do is attack low and middle income earners. I mean, has Malcolm Turnbull learnt nothing from the election? The election was a repudiation of his $48.2 billion tax cut for big business. Nobody believes that was a good idea. He scrapes over the line. He should listen to what the people have said. They do not want to see cuts to penalty rates. They want to see more engagement with this government, with employers and industry and with the regions. That hasn't happened. And we also, by the way, want to see a stricter arrangement for temporary work visas. There are regions in this country where people from overseas are getting chosen first. Now, we will always need immigration, is an absolute bedrock of our society. We built this country on immigration, but you do not continue to bring in temporary work visa applicants when unemployment, and youth unemployment in particular, is rising. So there's a lot of things that the government can do, but they're failing to attend to those matters.
On the issue of youth unemployment, you go.
Yeah. Ms. O'Connor, just on the new push on pokies and gambling reform, obviously Nick Xenophon's come out today and he said that he's planning on cooperating with the Greens on this, and that's in particular about $1 bets, and then on banning advertising during G-rated programs, that kind of thing. Is Labor prepared to work with those crossbenchers and the Greens on this change?
Well, is the government prepared to work with the crossbenchers or anyone that proposes an idea that doesn't come from the government benches? Let's just firstly see exactly what the member for Denison and Senator Xenophon are looking to propose. Let's then hear from the Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, as to what he wants to do with their proposal, and of course Labor will have a position. Now, we understand gambling is a pursuit many Australians like to engage in. We also know it can be a scourge for too many Australians. So we need to make sure we have this balance right. But if there's a proposal being put in the Parliament, it is incumbent on the Prime Minister firstly to respond, and no doubt Labor will have a view, but we need to see the detail of the proposal.
On youth unemployment, you're suggesting that that the government should be doing more to encourage maybe some of these kids to get jobs in some of the regions. But for example, with farmers, they would suggest that a lot of people don't want to go into the regions and pick fruit and all the rest of it, and that's why they
and that's why I've said that's why we do need temporary work visa applicants. That's why we do need, for example, people that are here possibly on holiday but also wanting to do some work, backpackers and students. What I'm saying is where there's a legitimate demand in the labour market of any region, then of course we need to use overseas workers if we cannot find local workers. But what I'm saying is it should be a requisite that you look local first to provide opportunities for people in Australia, and in failing that, of course, we should look overseas for temporary work visa applicants, and certainly in agriculture. I am aware that in remote and regional areas of Australia where they cannot find local labour, they rely upon temporary work visa applicants, and so they should. But let's at least say after you've looked local, you can look overseas.
Business groups insist that a company tax cut would help employment growth.
Yeah, nobody believes them.
So is there no room for compromise on your objection to the...
Yeah, well, we have compromised. We believe there should be a tax cut for small business. In fact, we agreed that we should reduce the tax on small business. We agreed with the government when they announced it in the budget for small businesses. And further to that, and also to adding, if you like, as an answer to a previous question, we also put in place a new jobs tax cut for small business. And we believe the government should seriously consider what we put forward, where you can actually claim more tax if you employ additional people. That would be one way, one very, I think, effective way you could employ more people, provide more tax relief for small businesses. But as for the idea that we would provide $48.2 billion over the next 10 years to big business, many of whom, to $7 billion to the banks, much of the many billions of dollars going overseas, is a nonsense. In fact, even the Treasury's own figures say you get to 1% of economic growth after 20 years, and it doesn't even start until a decade. Now that...
Okay, we'll leave that there for the moment. That was live from Canberra. Labor's employment spokesman Brendan O'Connor describing that unemployment figure released this morning as stubbornly high. He argues there's nothing behind the government's slogan of jobs and growth. So we'll be hearing from the Employment Minister, Michaelia Cash, in the next 15 minutes or so. She'll be speaking in Perth, and we'll bring you that live. Now, a woman and child have been found dead after it's believed they fell from an